Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today. My name is Paul Grogan, and welcome to my seminar on Paul's top tips for teaching games. Now, a little bit of an introduction about myself just before we start. I've been a gamer for a very, very long time, ever since the mid-'80s, really. I started playing games. I switched over to the modern board games hobby in the late 90s, but I've always been a gamer. And ever since the 80s, I've always been that person where people have come around my house and it's always been me that's been teaching people how to play games. So I've been teaching games for over 35 years, and I've actually been doing it professionally now, for probably about 8 or 9 years or so. All of my entire life is all about teaching games. By day, I am a rulebook writer and editor, which is a form of teaching people how to play games. I create instructional videos online, which is teaching people how to play games. And you may have seen me working at some of the bigger conventions, UK Games Expo, Essen Spiel, Gen Con, where I basically teach people how to play games. So my whole life is all revolved around teaching people how to play games. And I've picked up a few little tips along the way. So I'm going to be covering today, I'm going to split this seminar into three main sections. The first section is going to be some general tips that should apply to everybody, hopefully. The second part is I'm going to go into some specifics, which is particular tips that I find useful but might not work for you or your group. And then the third part of the seminar, I'm actually going to touch on my specialist method for demoing games specifically designed for teaching people games at conventions, but can be adapted otherwise. If you have any questions, I'm going to try and recreate the feeling that this is an actual real seminar. So although I can't see you, what I'd like you to do is if you have any questions during the seminar of related to the thing that I'm specifically talking about right now, could you put in the chat and put the words raise his hand and then put your question. And my lovely assistant is sat near me. Vicky's going to be monitoring the chat, and when she sees anybody say raise his hand, she will raise her hand. I will look across at the chat, and hopefully that will capture the feeling of being in a seminar. If you have any questions related to the topic that I'm discussing at that moment, then please use that. However, at the end of this seminar, I am going to have a general Q&A session. So if you have any general questions, please leave those to the end. Okay, right. Let me start with some general tips. Part one of the seminar is general tips that hopefully should apply to everybody. And I'm actually going to go off a little bit of a tangent at this point and talk about something else which I think is important, but not directly related to the teaching of games. And that is about the responsibility of whose job it is to teach the game. It generally seems to be the case that the person who buys the game or gets the game, it's their job to teach other people how to play that game. And it doesn't need to be, okay? Some people are better at teaching games than others. It is a skill. And I know many people have spoken to me over the years and have said, Paul, I'm really, really nervous about teaching games. I always worry about missing an important rule. My friends are relying upon me, and I really don't like it. In that case, you don't have to do it. Just because you bought the game, it shouldn't be your responsibility to teach the game. I've heard a lot of stories about people saying, oh, I bought a new game. I've now read the rule book twice. I've watched some videos online on how to play. I've read through all the forums. I've even set the game up myself. I've been through a test game. All of that just so that they're able to teach their friends how to play the game. And that responsibility shouldn't be on that person. If you're not comfortable with teaching games or learning games, that doesn't need to be you. You know, the internet is a great place. PDFs of the rule books are generally online. Share that PDF with your friends. If they're going to come around and play the game, I think they should help out and do a bit of the work as well. Possibly one of them, who might be particularly good at teaching games, they might say, look, I'll get the rule book, I'll read through the rule book, and I'll come around and I'll teach you the game. So yeah, it shouldn't be down to you as the person who purchased that game to do the teaching. Okay, right. Let me jump in now to some general tips, which, as I say, hopefully should apply to everybody. And this is, first of all, I always start with the theme of the game. Okay, now, as a medium to heavy Euro gamer, for me, theming games sometimes doesn't really matter. I like nothing more on a Friday night than pushing little wooden cubes around a table and counting up points at the end of the game. However, other people like the theme. And even if the theme of the game isn't particularly important, it's nice to start with, what is it all about? We're on a spaceship. We're trying to get to planet X, or we're all traveling to Kansas and we're trying to sell cows to make money, or whatever it is, whatever the theme of the game is, get that out there right at the start. Talk a little bit about the theme. Obviously, don't go into too much detail, but you need to just set the scene of what the game is, whether it's cooperative or competitive, You've got to say that at the very, very start. We're all working together to this, or we're all competing with each other for who is the best, whatever. The next very important thing to do is to explain to people how you win. A lot of people actually forget this. They jump into the detail, they start explaining the game, and you're like, wait a minute, what are we trying to do? Okay, you've told us that we're all gnomes living in a forest. What are we trying to do to win the game? That can either be it's the first player to get this, or it's the one with the most victory points at the end of the game, or whatever the victory condition is. But you need to start effectively at the end of the game and work backwards. So tell people how they win. And then depending on the game, you know, if it's something like Flamme Rouge, where you say it's a bicycle racing game, the player who crosses the finishing line first will win, you don't need any more explanation at that point. That's enough. Everybody gets in their mind and knows what to do. However, if it's a game where the most victory points wins, you might just want to spend a little bit of time saying, and you will get most of your victory points from constructing buildings here. Okay, right. So not only do we know how to win, you've actually told us the primary way of getting victory points. So that's good. So start with that, start with the theme, then start with, you know, how you win the game, mentioning whether it's competitive or cooperative. And then you can start going down a bit more into the details. I always sort of describe this as a very sort of satellite view on the game, very, very high up, and then zooming down. We've got a question in the chat, and this is, what's the point of playing the point of playing the game is to have fun. Why is it important to win? Yeah, that is a good point. And some people do that. Personally, I don't start my rules explanation with, right, you're all here to have fun. Okay, now let's get on with it. But you're right, the point of playing a game is to have fun. So once we've taken a bit of a zoom in approach, once we've covered the theme and the overall objective, we then start talking about the next thing for me would be the structure of the game. How is the game structured? Is it played over a number of rounds? Is it divided into phases or eras? You know, give me a very, very high level structure of how the game is. One of the games that I've recently taught doesn't have any rounds, doesn't have any phases. It literally has players taking it in turns around the table until the end of the game is triggered. Okay, so whatever the overall structure of the game is, start with that first. Again, you're zooming in from the very high level approach and go in and in. Once you've done that, you can then start going more into the details. So if the game is divided into, you know, a number of rounds, and each round has a number of phases, then you would then start explaining each of those phases in order. Now, it's very important not to go into too much detail too early, because everybody has a limited capacity of how much they can take in. So if a game was divided into, say, you know, 5 phases, I would give a very, very high level overview of each of the 5 phases first, so that everybody's got that. And then I would drill down a bit more and go into the detail there. Don't be afraid when you're delivering a teach of the game to say, I will come back to this later on. And I know some people don't like that, but I think it's very important when you are delivering a teach of a game that you maintain a good flow and a good structure. And I have exactly the same thing when I'm doing my rule books and when I'm creating my videos. It's important to keep the focus on whatever the current topic is. So that would mean, for example, that if you say, oh yeah, when you build this building, you get to introduce a new law. Okay, I'm talking about Frostpunk, the board game, which is a board game I'm working on at the moment. When you go to this building, you get to introduce a new law. I would then, if that was me, I would say, I'm going to come back to the laws later on. But what you've done is you've set the scene, you tell people, this building here, this allows you to introduce a law. And then this building here is about gathering food. This building here is about this, and cover the buildings. You can mention the laws later on, but I think it's really important to do that rather than say, right, this building here, this introduces a new law, and then spend another 10 minutes talking about the laws, because people have then forgotten that you're talking about the building. So again, don't be afraid to say, I'll come back to this later on. Keep the focus on what you're talking about, and then explain all of the other stuff later on. Talking about working backwards, there are certain games where I have actually literally gone through the process from back to front. And a game comes to mind, which is a few years old now, and it's a game called Colonia. And Colonia is a really interesting game in that there's basically 7 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And what you do on a Monday gives you the stuff that you then use on a Tuesday, which gives you stuff that you use on a Wednesday, etc., etc., etc. Now, when that rule book presented those days in order, but when I'm teaching the game, I actually I teach that game and I work backwards, okay? So I actually start with Sunday. I've said, look, you're going to win this game by having the most points, and how you get points is by loading goods onto ships. Loading goods onto ships will get you points, right? Sunday is how you load goods onto ships, and I'll explain that. And then I'll say, right, how do you get the goods? Well, that is Saturday. Saturday is all about how you get the goods. Right, okay, you get the goods by putting things into a factory and getting the work right. Factories, how do factories work? Well, that's Friday. Friday, the factories work, they need resources. How do you get the resources? That's Thursday. So basically what you're doing is you're actually describing the game in reverse order, but you're actually starting with the important stuff and you're working backwards there. So again, depending on the game, but that is another method that I find quite useful. So they are some general tips that I've got that should apply to most games. And now I'm going to start covering some specific tips that apply to me. And at this point, as I mentioned at the start, these are specific tips for me. If anything that I say from now on doesn't resonate with you, or you think, oh, that sounds like a great idea, Paul, but my group will not like that at all, then you can feel free to ignore these, because everybody learns games in a different way and everybody teaches games in a different way. And you have to adapt your teaching method to the target audience, which is great if you're playing a two-player game because your target audience is one person. But if you're in a mixed group, sometimes that can be difficult, especially if the players at the table all learn in a different way. There have been scientific studies shown about the three main ways of learning things. And one of them is by reading. Some people learn best by basically being given a rule book, sitting in a quiet room, reading the rule book, and that's the best way they learn how to play. Other people learn best by watching how to play videos online, either tutorial videos like the ones I create or playthrough videos. Some people learn best by the visual approach. But a very large percentage of people, and I can't remember what the last study was, but I think it's in the high 80s, learn best by doing, okay? My particular preferred method is not to sit there and read a rule book to everybody, because people fall asleep, that's boring. Not to explain every single rule of the game for 30 to 40 minutes, depending on the complexity of the game, but actually get people to start doing stuff, okay? Because for me and a lot of people, they learn best by actually doing stuff, actually moving things around on the table. So what I do when I'm teaching a new group of people, because I have various methods of teaching games, I generally ask them, what method do they want? Do they want to start playing as soon as possible? Or do they want a full teach in advance? And to be honest, most people who I ask that to want a full teach in advance. And I'm going to go on to the other method later on in the third part of this seminar, but a lot of people think that they need to know every single rule of the game beforehand. And I stress the word think because I used to think that as well. Okay. And I've met many, many people over the years who have all said, yeah, Paul, I need to know every single rule of the game before I start playing it. That's not completely true when I've asked them the same question a year or two later on, because there are other methods to teaching games. You do not have to explain every single rule up front. And if you are in the train of thought where you think, no, I'm one of those people, I need to know absolutely everything before we start playing, I would ask you just to keep an open mind, because there are other ways of doing it, which might end up being better for you. So we'll get to that more later on. My point is, for me, that a first game of something is always a learning game, okay? My first game of a game, whether it be a short, light game or a heavy, complex game, is a learning game. And I get it. I get that time is precious. And you might think, what's the point of sitting down and spending 3 hours playing a game if you're going to write it off as a learning experience? And I get that. But I also know that going into a first game, even if I know the rules, so even if I've read the rule book, I've watched the videos, I know every single rule of the game, I don't know how to put it all together. You know, there's only 2 people that I've met in my life who are able to listen to a 45-minute rules explanation, right? Literally 45 minutes of rules being thrown at them, and then sit there and go, okay, I've now worked out what I think is the best way to win. And that is Vlaada Chvátil and Isaac Childress. Now, I'm not like that. If I listen to 45 minutes of a rules explanation, I will be asleep after 10. But if I was able to stay awake for 45 minutes, okay, now I know the rules. I have no idea how to translate that into a victory, okay? So for me, my first game is like, right, I now know what I'm supposed to be doing. Let's just move stuff around. And you get to the end of the game and you go, oh, right, yeah. I realize now I should have invested more into property management, whatever, and I shouldn't have bothered with going down the pub with my mates and having a drink. So for me, first game's always a learning game, write it off. Which means for me, I kind of want to get through that first game as soon as possible so that we can then move on to playing it again, where at this point, everybody has a little bit more idea. Again, everybody should now know the rules of the game, but also everybody now has an idea of what kind of works in the game and what doesn't work in the game. One option that you might find, and I very rarely do this, but I have seen other people do it, and it is a method that I suggest, is that you actually start playing the game as soon as possible, and maybe even while you're reading through the rule book and you're starting to play the game, and you play through one round, or you play through a few turns or whatever, depending on the structure of the game. And then what you do is you stop and you reset. And every time I mention this, I see a bunch of horrified faces in the audience because they're like, what? You start playing a game and then after 15, 20 minutes, you stop and reset. But bear with us a minute, right? Because the other option to that is that you sit there for a good half an hour talking, pointing to things and not actually playing the game. And it actually takes in about the same time. So you could spend, half an hour teaching the rules of the game and then say, right, is everybody ready? Let's go. Or what you could do is start playing after 10 minutes, spend 20 minutes actually playing the game as a trial, reset, and then go back to the start. You've spent exactly the same amount of time, so you've not wasted any time. People think it's a waste of time, but actually you've used the same amount of time just in a different way. And personally, for me, 10 minutes of rules plus 20 minutes of playing around and then a reset would be much preferable to me than sitting there listening to 30 minutes of rules. But again, that's me. I have heard a number of horror stories and I've actually seen it. I've been at places where I've seen it, where I've seen people spend 6 hours playing a 2-player game, which would normally take 90 minutes. And it's because their first game, they want to know absolutely everything. And, they might enjoy it. And if you're the kind of people that wants to spend 6 hours playing a 90-minute game to learn the game, then that's completely up to you. For me, I'd prefer to play it in 2.5 hours, scrap it, set it up again, and then play again. So again, it's all about using the time most efficiently to suit whatever your particular preferred method of learning games and teaching games is. What else have I got written in here? Oh yeah, one other method. Right, now, I did this accidentally. Okay, this is a method which until I accidentally did it, I would probably never even thought of and never even suggested. I've now used this method a few times and I've spoken to other people about it and they said, no, that would never ever work for me. And again, if you're in that group, please try it because it might work. I got a game through once and I can't remember what game it was now, but it was a game that I was really excited about and I'd spoken to a few friends and we were all really excited about playing it. They were coming round on Friday night and we were going to play this game. And I ran out of time. I had a very busy week and I just did not have the time to learn the game and I wasn't able to teach them. So I said to them, I said, look, guys, really sorry about this, but I haven't been able to find time to learn this game. And you're coming round in an hour. Do you still want to play it? We will all learn it together. And they went, okay, sure. Now, this has never happened before because they all come round and either they teach me a game or I teach them a game. But in this particular instance, none of us had read the rules beforehand. So what we did is we sat down together round the table, we got the game out, we opened the rule book, and we started reading from the rule book. Now, you should never read from the rule book if you're teaching people how to play a game that you know, but in this case, none of us had read the rule book, okay? We all were so excited to play this game. I wish I could remember what game it was, but it was really good. And we just agreed, we're going to learn this game together. And sometimes we got confused, sometimes we passed the rule book round to each other, and it was brilliant. We had a great night, and all 3 or 4 of us, however many it was around that table, it was a shared experience. We all learned how to play the game together and it was great. And since then, I have actually done that probably 6 or so times now, and it's actually worked fine. Now, bearing in mind what I said earlier on, that method will not work for certain people, okay? Some people will not want the experience of learning a game from the rulebook. Personally, I think that's a little bit selfish, because what they're doing is they're saying, I want somebody else to put in the hard work. But for me, as a group where I play games with friends, it was an experience that we all shared together. You know, there's no way I'd go to a convention, find 3 random strangers and say, oh, do you want to play this game? And then say, right, we're now going to learn it from the rule book. No, wouldn't do that. But with a group of friends, it worked for us. Try it, see if it works for you. Right, I think that is it for part 2. How are we doing for time? 20 minutes in, we're doing okay. Right, I'm now going to move on to what I currently call the Gaming Rules Interactive Drip Feed Method for teaching people how to play games at conventions by Paul Grogan. I do need a shorter name for it at some point. If anybody can come up with a shorter name for it, please let me know. But the name is that long because it actually fully explains what this is. So I've been going to board game conventions for many years. I was at the very first UK Games Expo. I've been going to Essen Spiel for 21 years, I think. So I've been going to games conventions for a very, very long time. Now, for the last 5 or 6 years, I attend these conventions in a professional capacity where I don't design games, I demo games to other people. But for many, many years, I went to these conventions and I got demos of games from people. And some of those demos were awful. Some of them were just really, really bad demos for various reasons. And when I started demoing games professionally, I saw this as a problem. And every year I'd get back and I'd go onto Board Game Geek and I'd read through the forums, and there was always lots and lots of threads of, I've just had a terrible demo, and lots of people complaining about demos. That's not to say that all demos are terrible, because there are some people that are very good at demoing games and some publishers that are really good at it. But there are also other people who aren't very good at demoing games, okay? And I listened to all of this and I thought, there's got to be something that we can do as a community to try and make the experience of getting a demo of a game at a convention better. And I spent about a year to a year and a half doing a bit of research, talking to lots of people. Some of those people who posted on Board Game Geek, I actually contacted them and I said, look, I'm doing some research into demoing of games. Would you be able to help me out? And I contacted these people and I got from them the details of why they thought the demo was bad. And I spent 6 months to a year putting all of this information together. And then what I did is I started working on a demo method for teaching games. Now, the first time I used this method, it wasn't very good. It didn't really work very well. I wasn't very comfortable with it. But I then spent another year testing it out, trying it out, working on it. And I've now been using this method for about 4 or 5 years. And I'm happy to say that the method, it does work. And a number of other publishers have actually adopted this method now and started using it themselves. So the method was specifically designed for teaching people how to play games at conventions. However, it can be adapted and it can be used for you at home with your friends if they're up for it, okay? And again, if they're not up for it and they don't want to do this, then you don't have to do it, but just try it, okay? Because I have tried this method on various people. They've all agreed to it beforehand, and it actually works a lot better than you might think it works. What I will say, as I say, I've been using this method at conventions now for about 4 years. Every time I use this method, I always explain to the players beforehand, this is the method that I'm going to use to teach you how to play this game. And I do this at Gen Con, Essen, where there's tens of thousands of people who I don't know, okay? And honestly, I will tell you now, I mean, I demo to hundreds of people a year. Almost everybody at the end of the demo has said, thank you very much. That demo method really works well. Okay, and I'm not just saying that because I'm the one trying to sell you this method. I'm giving you the honest feedback that I've had from people. And the best feedback I've ever had from people is the people who at the start of that demo were like, oh, I don't know about that. We as a group, we like to know everything beforehand. And I'm like, okay, well, just bear with us a minute. Let's see how this goes. And everything else. And I never forget, a couple of years ago, was it last year? No, I think it was a couple of years ago. It was a group of 4 Germans at Essen Spiel. And they were the most resistant that I've ever had to this method. They almost said, no, thank you. That method is not going to work for us. We will go and find another game. They almost said that, but I gave them some chocolates and I convinced them to stay. And I said, look, trust me, just try it. We don't have to do it for long and we will see. And we spent an hour and a half playing Polestar 2849. So yeah, it must have been a couple of years ago. And at the end of the demo, I sat down with them. I think we actually went for a coffee afterwards or something like that. And I sat down with them and I said, look, I'm actually after some honest feedback. You didn't think this method was going to work. And they said no. And I said, how do you now feel about it? And they went, it made us a bit uncomfortable, but it worked. Okay. So that was my most resistant people to it. They really didn't think it was going to work. They really didn't want it. And then when they actually saw it and they saw it and how it was going to work, they were like, oh, okay, this does actually work. And what's really funny about this story, or I think it's funny, is the very next day, I was walking around the halls of Essenspiel and they were sat at a table and they were getting a demo of Agra. Now, Agra is a fairly heavy, complex game. And they were sat there and they were getting a demo of it. And I think the demo person had just stepped away from a minute. And I said, oh, because I know Agra, I knew the game. And I was like, oh, how is it? And they went, oh, this guy's just talked to us for 45 minutes. And I'm like, yeah. And they said, it's just, we're sat there, it's 45 minutes at a busy convention. And all they've done is just tell us all of the rules of the game. And I was like, yeah, okay, so converts for me. Anyway, enough of that. Let me now talk a bit more about how this demo method works. And it applies to every game, okay? Some people think this demo method is only for use with heavy, complex games, and it's not. I use this demo method with code names all the way through the ages. Okay, so no matter what the game is, the principles of this demo method can be applied to almost every game. And the basic principle is get people playing as early as possible because, and this is where it comes into play, where it's at a convention, this is a demo. The objective of a demo is at a convention is to give the players an idea of how the game plays, to see if it's the kind of game that they are going to want to play. The purpose of a demo at a convention is not to play an entire game. I mean, some people do. It's really weird when you see some people get a demo of a game at a convention and then say, we're not going to buy it because the building strategy is broken. And I'm like, you've played the game once, okay? You have no idea. So the purpose of a demo is to get an idea about the game. You don't generally need to play a full game in order to do that, unless it's a game like Codenames that you kind of do. But there's no way you should sit down and play an 8-hour game of Through the Ages at a convention, because you'll know after 2 hours whether you like the game or not. But anyway, the method applies to all kinds of games, easy or hard. And it's about getting people started as early as possible. And I call it the interactive drip feed method because you will drip feed rules to players during the game. But, and this is where you've got to be very careful, you cannot just start using this method and expect it to go perfectly every time, okay? It took me about 1.5 years to perfect the method. And in that 1.5 years, I made all sorts of mistakes, okay? You cannot, for example, in a game of Tzolk'in, wait until round 7 and say, oh, by the way, there's a rule I haven't told you yet. At the end of this round, you all need to feed your people. What? You can't do that, okay? So you have to know the game extremely well, and you have to know what rules they need to know at the start and what rules can be left, okay? So to give you an idea, I have just come this morning, I've just done a demo of the Lost Ruins of Arnak. This is a new game coming out from CGE later this year. And in the game, one of the things that you can do is you can progress up the research track. So I explain at the start of the game how you progress up the research track because it's really important and every player needs to know how to do it. However, when you get to the end of the research track, you find the lost city of Arnak, and there is extra stuff that you can do for more points. I didn't explain that until the very last round of the game, because all you need to tell people is the important stuff, which is at the end of the research track is the lost city of Arnak. There's an extra way of getting points. That's all you need to know. It will be good. Players need to know whether something will be good or bad. So for example, going back to Tzolk'in, you probably, I would normally mention it around, well, first of all, I'd mention it at the start of the game. I'd mention that the game is divided into 4 quarters, and at the end of each quarter, you have to feed your people. I'd mention it then. but I wouldn't go into any detail. Then when we were probably 1 or 2 rounds in, once people have got used to the main mechanism of the game, I'd then say, remember, in 5 rounds time, you're all going to have to feed your people. And somebody will then say, how much is it? And I will say, it's 2 corn per worker. Okay, right, good. And then what I'd do is I would wait till round 6 and I'd say, just as a reminder, at the end of next round, you have to feed your people, giving people the rules along the way. Somebody will probably then ask, what if I don't feed my people? You'll lose some points. Okay, right, we know it's bad. They don't need to know, lose 3 points, stand on 1 leg, go to the chip shop. You know, they don't need to know the details. All they need to know is feed your people. If you don't feed your people, bad stuff will happen. Okay, so tell people what they need to know at the time they need to know it. Now, I've mentioned it applies to simple games as well as complex games. And I'm going to give you an example here. If you know the game Codenames, also from CGE, but it's a good example. Codenames has a rule in the game called the +1 rule. So if you give a clue of Armadillo 2, your team are allowed to have 3 guesses. That's the rule of the game, okay? But on the very, very first turn of the game, if the Spy Master gives the clue Armadillo 2, and the team select that one, and they get those 2, you do not need to explain the +1 rule, okay? The +1 rule is a clever rule, and it's in there for a specific reason to fix a particular problem with the, well, it's not a problem with the game, but it would be a problem with the game without the +1 rule, but it's in there for a specific reason. So if your Spy Master gives you a clue to find 2 words, and you find the 2 words, whoever's teaching the game doesn't need to explain the +1 rule. And in fact, I have watched people demoing Codenames many, many, many times, and if they start to explain the +1 rule at the start of the game, people are like, what? Why would I ever want to have 1 more? It doesn't make sense, okay? When the +1 rule comes into effect is if you miss a clue. So let's say, for example, your Spy Master gave the clue Armadillo 2, and you only found 1 of them. But then on the next round, your Spy Master gave the clue of weather 3, and you found all those 3. That is when you introduce the +1 rule, because that is the first point in the game where it is relevant. And that's at the point where you can actually say, let me now explain the +1 rule. Now, it's really, really important. And I'm going to say really, really important a lot, but it's really important that when you are drip feeding a rule to people, that you do say to people, although I'm only telling you about this rule now, this rule was actually there from the start of the game. It's just not something that you probably would have used earlier. Otherwise, people will go away thinking, oh, right, that rule only came in on round 4. And it's like, no, the rule was there all of the time. So there's a light game, and there's an example of how you can apply the drip feed method to a light game. Let me now go to the very, very end of the scale. I'm going to grab a quick drink. And I'm going to talk to you now about 2 super heavy games, and that is Through the Ages and Lisboa. And here's what I do. I can get people playing a game of Through the Ages within 2 minutes. Okay, now some people think that's impossible, but here's how I do it. I set the board up, okay? I explain to people that this is a civilization-based game. It takes place over a number of eras. It represents thousands of years of human history. At the end of the game, the winner is the player with the most culture, and I'll point to the culture track, okay? This is going to be a demo. We're only going to play this for about 1.5 hours to 2 hours to give you an idea of how it works. We're going to learn as we go. Right, the first player is Stephanie. Right, Stephanie, you're the first player, and it's your turn. What I'd like you to do on the first turn of the game is to pick one of those 5 cards. Off you go. That's it. Okay? And I've used this method for demoing Through the Ages to people 40 times, 50 times maybe. Okay? Again, you've already led them in. You've already said, look, I'm going to be doing a demo of this game. We're going to be learning it. This isn't going to be a full game. We're going to be learning as we're going. But literally, there's 5 cards. Pick the one with the nicest artwork. Okay? And you don't explain any of them. And people are looking at them and going, well, I've no idea. There's a purple card. There's a green card. I don't know which one to pick. And I'm like, don't worry about it. They're all good. Pick whichever one you want, and then we'll explain how that happens. Okay? And I did mention at the start that this method is specifically designed for teaching people how to play games at conventions. However, I have also used this method with Through the Ages for teaching friends of mine at my house, because they wanted to learn how to play Through the Ages And I firmly believe that this is the best way of learning a complex game, is literally just start doing random stuff and see what happens. Now, I also mentioned that it is very important, if you are going to be using this method for teaching a game, you have to know the game absolutely 100%. And this is what a lot of people don't see. But when I am doing one of these demos, and this is where I touch on the word interactive, I know exactly what's going on, right? I am facilitating that demo. I'm not just teaching them the rules. I'm actually running that demo as if it's kind of like a pre-rehearsed show, okay? So Stephanie will look at the 5 cards and she'll pick the purple one because it's got a pretty picture on it, which is what I do. And then I'll go, right, that is a wonder. And here's how wonders work, okay? And she'll take the card, put it next to a player board, and I'll explain that. And then I'll be like, right, Brian, it's now your go. You now get to pick a card. Oh, you've chosen Aristotle. Aristotle is a leader. Here's how the leaders work. And gradually, over an hour and a half, you get to the end of the demo and people know how to play the game, and they've done it by actually playing the game. I also mentioned Lisboa, which is another game that I was involved in. I did some development work on the game. I wrote the rulebook. I did the video. And I've got a story to tell you about, and this was at BGG-Con in America about 3 years ago. It was the year that Lisboa came out, and it was in the hot games area. The hot games area at BGG-Con is an area where there is like about 30 or 40 tables. The top 25 hottest games that have come out recently are all there. And there's a load of people, part of the BGG demo team, that are there that will help you learn how to play those games. And they do a really good job, and I'm friends with a lot of them. But they don't find out what those top 25 games are until about 2 weeks before. And then they get sent a list of 25 games, and they have to learn as many of those games as they can, okay? And that is a tall ask when you have games like Lisboa on that list. And I was working as part of the crew that year, and I was helping them out. And Lisboa was a game that I knew very well, but I was also busy there doing other demos. And Lisboa was set up on the table next to me. So I was there busy running a game of Pulsar 2849 or Adrenaline, I can't remember what it was. And then one of the other BGG demo crew, and I'm actually friends with them, so this is not me having a go at them. I actually know them and I really like them and we get on well. But they were teaching Lisboa. And they'd read through the rules of Lisboa and they knew roughly how to play it, but they spent 45 minutes, 50 minutes teaching a group of 4 guys how to play the game. And I was sat there on the table next to them, sort of keeping an eye on them. And I said, look, if you get stuck, let me know. And he said, no, I'm all right, Paul. Okay. And then I'd finished my game of Pulsar 2849 and I was about to go for lunch. And I looked across and they'd just finished getting the end of the teach. So there were 45 minutes being taught how to play the game and they were all sat there at the table. So I popped over and I said, okay, I said, you've had the teach. Are you good to go now, or have you got any questions? And they went, we haven't got the faintest idea what's going on. I mean, I'm not making this up. This is what happened. And I said, oh, okay. I said, you've no idea at all? And they said, no. We've just had a 45-minute lecture, but we didn't take any of it in. We don't know what to do. And I said to them, I said, okay, I'm supposed to be on lunch, but I love this game. And if you want me to teach you, I'll use a completely different method and we'll just start playing. And they went, oh, yes, please. So they drew 5 cards, their starting hand. You're supposed to choose. I just gave them at random. And I said, just pick a card. Pick a card from your hand at random, put it on the table, and I'll tell you what happens. And they went, what? I went, yeah, just do it. So they put a card on the table and I said, right, that's one of these cards. That's going to allow you to go here and do this. Right, okay. We do that. You're going there, you're buying this, you're moving that. That's how that works. Everybody okay with that? Yeah. Next player, pick a different card. Not the same one, just a different card. Put it into play and we'll explain how that one works. 30 minutes later, we had been through, by actually playing and doing, all of the actions of the game, and everybody knew how every single action worked. And I said, right, do you all now have an idea of how it all works? And they went, yeah. I said, okay, do you want to carry on playing or do you want to reset it? They actually carry on playing. So what I mentioned ages ago about play a bit, reset, you don't have to do that. You could just play a bit and then say, look, are we okay? Do we want to carry on from here? Or has anybody made such critical mistakes that they feel they want to reset? And most of the time, people are like, no, I'm fine. You know, let's just carry on playing. So that was really good. And they came back to me at the next day and they said, look, thank you very much for that, because they really wanted to play the game. And for a game like that, it was just too much rules overload at the start. So yeah, that was another story that I had. I have another story as well. And this is when I did a little bit of demo work for Karma Games at Essen Spiel about 2 or 3 years ago. And I was demoing Clans of Caledonia one Saturday afternoon. I think the demo person he had was off sick, and he contacted me and he said, look, I know you're busy, but would you be able to stand in and do demos of this game? And I said, yeah, I'll help you out. I get to wear a kilt for the afternoon. We're all good. So I stepped in and I said to him, I said, look, I have a demo method which I use for teaching how to play games. And he said to me, well, actually, Paul, I've got a demo method as well. And I'm like, oh, what is it? Because I'm always learning. And he came up with this. So Clans of Caledonia, if you know the game, this will make sense. If you don't know the game, the action system is a little bit like Terra Mystica. So if you know Terra Mystica, but not Clans of Caledonia, you've got an idea. On your turn, there are 8 different actions you can do, okay? Now, my demo method for the game would be to sort of say, just pick any of the actions, and then we'll explain how it works. What Juma said to me is, he said, what I'd like you to do, Paul, is I'd like you to make player 1 do action number 1. And then player 2 do action number 2, player 3 do action number 3, etc., etc. So literally, don't give them a choice, right? Player 1 must do action number 1, player 2 must do action number 2. Remember, it's a demo. And then after 8 players have taken a turn, all of the actions have been seen, all of the actions have been explained, and then let them play after that. And I was like, oh, that's really good. Yeah, I like that. So it was kind of combining the 2 methods together. So I did that, and I spent the afternoon demoing Clans of Caledonia to dozens and dozens of people. Well, maybe dozens of people. And the great thing was, we literally got started. Within 5 minutes, we're playing the game. We give a high-level overview. We start playing the game. Player 1 takes the turn, done. Player 2 takes the turn, done. And after about 45 minutes, the players had played enough of the game that they got an idea of whether they liked the game or not. And then they went and bought it, or they didn't buy it. That's completely up to them. On the next table to me was another person wearing a kilt who was also part of the demo team. Right. So in the time it took, we both started at the same time. In the time it took me to start the game, start playing it, deliver a full demo, and end the demo, the person on the table next to me had just finished explaining every single rule of the game, and then went, you've only got 10 minutes to play because the next group starts at 3 o'clock. Okay. All of these things combined, as I say, I've been using this method now at conventions for many, many years. And all of these experiences that I've had and all of these people that I've spoken to have basically told me that this method does work. It is good when it's used correctly, but you have to be very, very careful. You have to know the game absolutely, totally perfectly, so that you can actually facilitate the demo and make sure that it goes well. Make sure you allow people to take back their moves, because what you don't want is somebody to feel uncomfortable and you're saying, look, just do something, and they do it and you go, oh, well, I'm afraid you've fallen down a pit and take 20 points of damage. Didn't you see that there was a pit there? Oh, that's a pit icon. I'll explain it as we go. No, you don't do that. You allow people, oh, well, if that's a pit, I won't do that then. Allow people to take things back. How are we doing for time? We're 1:45. Right. I could talk about this demo method for a week, okay? If you have any queries about it, I would say, please come and find me after this seminar. You can't do that. Well, you could by popping round, but please don't, because I've got demos all day. I'm more than happy to talk about this in more detail. I've got many other stories, many other examples. If you're interested in learning the method, please get in contact with me, and I'm more than happy to, go into more detail. But for now, let's go over for 10 minutes to any questions. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Again, if you can use the text raises your hand, you probably don't need to actually, because I'm going to be looking at the chat, and we'll see if we've got any stories. How did you get into being a rulebook editor? Do you have any advice? You'd love to do the same. So yeah, a little bit of a side topic, but it is all tied in with what I do. How did I get into being a rulebook editor? Accidentally. Yeah, when I actually started working full-time in the board games industry, I created Gaming Rules, the company, in order to create instructional videos. I never intended that I would become, almost a full-time rulebook editor, and that's how it's happened. So it was sort of accidentally, but how did I get into doing it? I'm a passionate person, and I'm passionate about rulebooks being good, and I offered my help to various companies to try and make those rulebooks better. And in the years that I was doing that kind of, it learned me things. I'm still honing my skills. I'm still learning things all the time, but yeah, I kind of got it into it that way. Any tips for mechanisms to new players? It depends on the mechanism, but yeah, you're absolutely right. You can't just say, oh, this is a worker placement game and expect that everybody knows that. And you can't say this is a deck building game. So with some players, you will need to explain things in more detail. One thing I find useful, and you should never really compare games to other ones, but you could say, for example, has anybody played Dominion? And if everybody goes, yes, we've all played Dominion, you can go, right, well, this is a deck building game like Dominion. And they go, oh, right. So ask people if they have played, have you played this game? And that might help you. What would that kind of teaching be appropriate for play testing a game? Yes, absolutely. You can use this demo method for anything. So yeah, you could definitely use it for play testing games as well. Any tips for someone that demos games and often gets handed a rule book for 30 minutes before the doors open? Yes, and we could talk about this for ages. If you are working as part of a demo team and you get given a rule book 30 minutes before the door opens, I'm going to be harsh here. Don't work for that company again, okay? Vicky's laughing. As somebody who is responsible for organizing demo teams for publishers, that is not the way of doing it. If you are the person responsible for a demo team, it is your responsibility to make sure the demo team get given the rule books for the games a week in advance. They need to be sent a prototype copy or anything else, and I've heard this story before. It's really, really bad. And it's one of my trigger points. So I'm getting a bit wound up even thinking about it. How is the Jaffa Cake supply holding up? The Jaffa Cake supply is gradually running out. I definitely need to meet more. Oh, we've got lots of questions in the chat. There's too many now. Let me just grab a couple because we've got a few more minutes. Will we be able to rewatch this later? Yeah, you will be able to. How do you teach yourself a game? I like to learn from being shown, but only if I have the rulebook. I find it difficult. Yeah, so me personally, and this is ironic, I can't learn a game from watching a video. And I'm the person who makes these videos, okay? Because I fall asleep if I watch a video. So for me, rulebooks, but what I like to do is I like to get the rulebook, set the game up, and actually start doing stuff, okay? If it says place a worker on this space to get 3 wood, I put the worker on the space and I get 3 wood. So I set the game up myself, and I try and play through it. What about when rules are so interconnected, it feels like you can't explain one rule at a time? Yeah, this is a difficult one. And there are certain games like that where you're like, oh, and there's this, and I'll come back to that later on. Oh, and then there's this, and that, yeah, it's hard. It will come with practice. It will come with experience. I mean, bearing in mind, I very often demo the same game over and over and over and over again. So through the ages, I have taught, I don't know, 60, 70 times. Most people are never going to teach that, the same game that amount of time. So I'm lucky in a way that, as part of a demo team, I do that. But yeah, teaching ones with interconnected mechanisms, it is tricky. The only tip I've got is to keep making those connections, okay? So if you go here, that will get you 1 prestige. Remember prestige? We talked about that earlier. Moving up the prestige track gets you this. Okay, yeah. So try and do that. How often do you actually find time to play games for enjoyment with people who know how to play versus just teaching? Very rare. Very, very rare now, with my job and my life the way that it is, that I am playing a game actually just for fun. Don't think that's sad, because I love my job. Playtesting games, developing games, teaching people how to play games in practice for doing live streams. I love doing it. So yeah, it's not too bad. Badges, yes. If you are watching this, you are entitled to a badge. There is a link in the chat, so please click on that link. There is a UKGE badge system going on this weekend, and yeah, you get a badge. What about games where you can do almost any action up front, such as Architects of the West Kingdom? Okay, in that game, we got 5 minutes left. So in that game where you can do any action at all from the start, I would use the method that we used for Clans of Caledonia, which was tell people a 1-sentence overview of what the actions are. That is the boat action, that will get you to go on a boat. That is the harvest action, that will get you food. Right, just tell people, give them the list of the actions with a 1-sentence. Then, once you have explained to people, this is a learning game, this is a demo game, there's no bad decisions, and if there are any bad decisions, you'll let them undo them, just say pick one of the actions, okay? Just let them pick the action and then go through it. What game do you find is the hardest to teach, and is there something you find makes games hard to teach? Oh, what game do I find the hardest to teach? I mean, people say to me, surely teaching Through the Ages is really hard. I teach Through the Ages now, not quite with my eyes closed, but because I've done it so much and I've been playing Through the Ages for the last 15 years, I know the game extremely well. So even super complex games that I find the hardest to teach are ones where it's really, really complex. There is a lot of interlocking mechanisms and I don't know the game as well. But I would like to say that with the amount, with enough time and effort put into me practicing it, I should be able to master the teach of any game, he says. What do you do about players that keep interrupting your teach and asking about other parts of the rules? Oh yeah, I do get that. It does happen, especially at conventions where I don't know people. But what I will do is I will just have to say to them, I'll come back to that later on. And you get this, what does this icon do over here? And you just have to say, I will get back to that later on. Honestly, I will. They need to trust you that you are delivering the teach with the correct flow as possible. What I do is I try and turn that around into the positive. So that player who's been asking me, what does this icon do? What does this icon do? At the point in the flow of the teach where I get to explain that icon, I say, right, I'm now going to explain what this icon does. And I'll be looking at that person and I'll be saying, look, this is just for you. So yeah, practice makes perfect. Yes, it does. I may have missed some other questions. Ricky's saying he keeps trying to get me to play games, but I'm too busy. Yeah. What do I think about the term the teach? Well, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I remember once when I posted one of my videos and I called it teaching and playthrough, and somebody contacted me and said that's the wrong word. So I now call it tutorial and playthrough. Yeah, I'm not sure what I think about the term the teach. I know some people use it. I tend not to. What is the snail behind you? You need one. This is Steve. This is Steve. This is my 50th birthday present. It is from a company called Jellycat. Yeah, this is Steve. So yeah. One of the best presents I got for my birthday. There you go. Steve has appeared in a number of live playthrough videos. Last question. How do you stop yourself from going too deep and mentioning all possible options when you're trying to teach the basics? Practice. And it's really hard for me sometimes. But yeah, you've just got to restrain yourself to not going too deep when people will just get confused. Other than that, we're going to wrap things up. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much to Millie for inviting me to do this seminar and for obviously hosting it. Millie is running all of the stuff in the background. So what you're not seeing is you're not seeing all of the people working for UK Games Expo in the background, putting all of this together. So yeah, massive thank you to them. Thank you to everybody for watching. And as I say, when we are allowed to go back to conventions, if you have any other questions, come and find me, grab me, get me a glass of water, and I'll happily talk to you about things. But for now, thanks for watching. Bye now.